great day, buddy. Well, we've made it after my 2-hour commute this morning. Welcome to Jacksonville, the land of barbershops, tattoo shops, and strip clubs. Let's go get the shop opened. Well, the season's over and my bow has been sitting in my car for probably the last 2 or 3 weeks. I'm notorious for kind of tossing it around. So I'm gonna go ahead and step back in the back this morning and put it through paper and see if it's still in tune. So I'm gonna pull off these broadheads real quick. We got some severs on here. We got some Rage, no collars. And get this, just reconfirm this thing. It's been a few months since it's been put through paper again. So I just want to make sure that everything is still good to go with it. Looks good. So one of the things I notice is when I don't shoot a lot, I torque the bow. So that was very evident through paper right there. My first shot, I had a little bit of a knock left tear. I shot it again and I looked at my grip and I looked up at my cams and the strings to make sure everything was in line, and then of course they weren't. So I corrected that by putting a little bit of pressure on the front of the riser, and boom, perfect bullet hole. So this always reminds me that I need to be more consistent with my shooting. So I'm gonna head over to the range and put a few arrows through it just to knock off a little bit of the rust and kind of get back in the habit of shooting more consistently now that the season's over and I've got a little bit of time in the mornings. Sight definitely got bumped, so looks like I need to make a little bit of an adjustment on it. Bit of adjustment, and I think we will call that good. We might just be a hair low, but I think we're looking good. So this is one of the first things that I wish I would have considered more when I got into archery, or thought about a little bit more. And that is shooting my bow more. Like anything else, practice. You got to practice a lot with your equipment, and I just didn't consider it as much as I should have. Obviously, we put my bow right through paper again, and right out of the gate, I got a knock left tear. And so I shot it again. I double checked my form, checked my grip, looked up at my cams to make sure my strings and cams were all in line. Once I released that shot, perfect bullet hole. So no tuning issues. It was just technique and form that had actually broken down by not shooting my bow. And it's only been a couple of weeks since I've really spent some time behind it. So that is one of the first big things that I wish I would have thought about more when I first got into bow hunting, is just spending more time behind the bow itself in the off season. You know, not just picking up the bow right before the season kicks off and shooting the bow a couple days before I decide to go out in the woods and hunt. So big learning curve there for me. All right, story time. So when I first bought my very first bow, I had no idea what I was getting into. I bought this bow secondhand, and I didn't realize that a bow had to be set up to an individual, that draw length has to be correct for somebody. I just was uneducated and just thought you buy a bow, you pick a bow up and you start shooting a bow. Well, that was not the case. That was a major learning curve for me. So the first bow I ever bought was, I think, an Elite Energy 35. I bought it secondhand from somebody. It came at 28 inches. I'm actually a 28.5-inch draw length, and that bow had never been tuned or put through paper or anything like that. So I bought that bow just assuming that I could just pick up that bow and start shooting it, which I did okay, but I didn't realize that, you know, arrow flight matters. Everything doesn't just work. It has to be set up and tuned correctly. So that was one of the major learning curves for me. And I highly encourage anybody, if you're buying a new bow, if you're buying a bow secondhand, make sure you have somebody who knows what they're doing, look it over and walk you through the process. Because especially if you're buying a bow secondhand, you don't know if there's any issues with that bow. If you're unfamiliar with archery, if you don't know if that bow can accommodate your draw length correctly. So there's a lot of things to consider. So I highly encourage you to go speak with somebody at a pro shop or somebody who really has been in archery for a long time to get some insight as to what you need to know when buying a bow. Because if you buy a bow that doesn't fit you correctly or has issues, it's got cracked limbs, it's a bad time. It's a waste of money, and you'll never be able to, one, if that bow's not set up correctly, you'll never be accurate with it. So always, always, always make sure you buy a bow that fits you, is tuned correctly, and set up specifically for you. That was a huge learning curve for me, and probably the main reason the first deer I ever shot was a bad shot, because that bow was not set up and tuned correctly. So major learning curve for myself. One of the other key things that I wish I would have known when I first got into this game was arrows. I was unaware that you couldn't just pick up any arrow and put it through your bow, right? Looking back, when I first started shooting, I had Victory VAPs. I had 300, 350, and 400 spine arrows, all cut to different lengths that I was shooting through this one bow. So that means all the weights were different, the stiffness and all the shafts were different. So obviously the flight was going to be impacted with each different arrow. So that was one of the major things that I didn't know. I didn't realize that you couldn't just pick up whatever arrow you want and start shooting it. So major learning curve. So whenever you buy a new bow, make sure you buy arrows that are the right spine for the bow that you're shooting, and they're built correctly for your bow and they're tuned to that bow. Major learning curve. It greatly improves the accuracy of your bow when you're shooting an arrow that's set up for your bow. So those were some of the most important things that I wish I would have known when I got into the bow hunting side of things. So like I said, shooting my bow more often, making sure I bought a bow that could be set up correctly for me, was tuned for me, and set up specifically for my draw length, and then making sure I was shooting the correct arrows out of my bow. So all major things that I think that you should consider and that I wish I would have known earlier in my bow hunting career. So let us know what you guys think were some of the most important things that you wish you would have learned whenever you first got into bow hunting. Drop them in the comments below. I'm sure there's a lot of great education that you guys could provide that a lot of people would be interested in. And as always, we appreciate you guys following along and watching our videos, and we'll see you guys in the next video.